December 3rd, 1975, 11:47 p.m. The International Hotel in Las Vegas. Elvis Presley is halfway through Love Me Tender when something happens that will shatter everything he thought he knew about his marriage, his career, and the people he trusted most. A woman in the front row, blonde hair, red dress, holding something above her head like it's a weapon, catches his attention. At first, Elvis thinks it's another love letter, another room key, another desperate attempt to get the king's attention. He's seen it all before. Hell, he's built a career on it. But when his eyes focus on what she's holding, the words die in his throat. The music keeps playing behind him, but Elvis Aaron Presley, the man who's never met a crowd he couldn't charm, never faced a moment he couldn't handle, goes completely silent. It's a photograph, not a headshot or a publicity still, but a candid picture taken with a telephoto lens. The image shows his ex-wife Priscilla walking out of a government building in Washington, D.C., her face turned away from the camera like she's trying to hide. She's carrying a manila folder and checking over her shoulder like someone who's afraid of being followed. Elvis stares at this photo for what feels like an eternity, but is probably only 10 seconds. The band keeps playing. The crowd keeps cheering, but something fundamental shifts in that moment, something that will change the trajectory of the last 2 years of Elvis's life. Without a word, without explanation, without even acknowledging the 15,000 people who paid to see him perform, Elvis walks off stage. Not the dramatic exit of a temperamental star, but the hollow walk of a man who's just realized everything he believed about his life is a lie. Security finds him 3 hours later, locked in his dressing room, frantically making phone call after phone call. They expect to find him drunk or high or crying, the usual responses when Elvis's personal life crashes into his professional world. Instead, they find him stone-cold sober, speaking in hushed, urgent tones to people whose names they don't recognize. "I need to know everywhere she's been for the past 6 months," he's saying into the receiver. "Every meeting, every appointment, every goddamn coffee date. I need to know tonight." Jerry Schilling, Elvis's friend and bodyguard, later described that night as the moment he realized Elvis wasn't just a performer struggling with fame and addiction. He was a man fighting for his life, and he just discovered that the war had been going on longer than anyone realized. But here's what nobody understood in that moment, what wouldn't become clear until years later when sealed government documents started surfacing. That photograph wasn't evidence of an affair or a secret shopping trip or any of the normal betrayals that destroy celebrity marriages. That photograph was evidence of something much more dangerous, something that would explain why Elvis spent his final years not just battling his demons, but looking over his shoulder like a man who knew his time was running out. See, Priscilla hadn't been sneaking around Vegas or Hollywood or any of the places where famous ex-wives typically cause trouble. She'd been in Washington, D.C., walking out of the Federal Bureau of Investigation headquarters, carrying documents that could have destroyed not just Elvis's career, but the entire infrastructure that had been built around his fame. The woman in the red dress who showed Elvis that photo, she wasn't a random fan with lucky timing. She was a message delivered at the exact moment when it would cause maximum damage to whatever Priscilla had been working on for the past 18 months. Someone wanted Elvis to see that photo. Someone wanted him to know that his ex-wife had been meeting with federal investigators. But the question that haunted Elvis through those 3 hours of phone calls wasn't who took the picture or who sent the messenger. The question was why seeing it made him realize that Priscilla might have been the only person in his entire world who was actually trying to save his life. Because by December 1975, Elvis Presley was drowning, not just in pills and alcohol and the crushing weight of fame, but in a web of financial and legal problems that threatened everything he'd built. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, kept telling him not to worry about the business side, to focus on performing while the adults handled the complicated stuff. His father Vernon managed his personal finances and assured him that everything was under control, that the money was being invested wisely, that Elvis's future was secure. Dr. George Nishapoulos monitored his health and prescribed whatever medications were necessary to keep Elvis functional and performing. Everyone in Elvis's inner circle had a role to play in protecting the king. But lately, Elvis had started to wonder who was protecting him from the people who claimed to be protecting him. The prescription bottles kept multiplying on his nightstand. The financial statements that Vernon showed him kept getting more complicated and harder to understand. Colonel Parker's explanations for why Elvis couldn't tour internationally or sign certain movie deals started sounding less like business strategy and more like someone trying to keep him isolated and dependent. And through it all, Priscilla had been asking questions, lots of questions, questions about why Elvis needed so many different medications, questions about why his touring revenue didn't seem to match what he was taking home, questions about why Colonel Parker always had reasons why Elvis shouldn't make certain business decisions on his own. Elvis had interpreted her questions as criticism, as an ex-wife trying to control him from a distance. He'd grown tired of explaining his choices to someone who'd chosen to leave him anyway. Their conversations had become shorter, more formal, focused on their daughter Lisa Marie and nothing else. But sitting in that dressing room, making phone call after phone call to private investigators and lawyers and anyone else who might be able to tell him what his ex-wife had been doing in Washington, D.C., Elvis started to realize that Priscilla's questions hadn't been criticism. They'd been a lifeline thrown to a drowning man who was too proud to admit he was going under. The first investigator Elvis reached that night was a former FBI agent named Marcus Webb, who specialized in financial fraud cases. Webb had been quietly looking into some irregularities in Elvis's business dealings at Priscilla's request, irregularities that suggested someone with access to Elvis's accounts had been systematically stealing from him for years. "Mr. Presley," Webb told him during that late-night phone call, "your ex-wife came to us 6 months ago with evidence that someone in your organization has been embezzling millions of dollars from your earnings. She's been working with federal investigators to build a case." "Who?" Elvis asked, though he was starting to suspect the answer would destroy him. "Everyone, sir. Your manager, your father, your doctor. They've all been involved in different aspects of what appears to be a coordinated effort to extract as much money as possible from your career, while keeping you dependent and unable to make independent financial decisions." The room went silent, except for the sound of Elvis's breathing and the distant noise of Las Vegas traffic. Everything he'd thought he knew about his life, his family, his career, was crumbling around him like a house of cards in an earthquake. But Webb wasn't finished delivering devastating news. "There's something else, Mr. Presley. The people who have been stealing from you, they know that Mrs. Presley has been investigating them. That photograph you saw tonight, it was taken by someone working for them. They're trying to force you to cut ties with her before she can testify about what she's discovered." Elvis closed his eyes and felt the weight of understanding settle over him like a burial shroud. The woman he'd started to see as an enemy had actually been fighting a secret war to save him. And the people he'd trusted most, his own father, the man who'd managed his career for 20 years, the doctor who claimed to care about his health, they weren't just stealing his money. They were betting on his death. That photograph, that moment on stage, that woman in the red dress, it was all part of a plan to isolate Elvis from the one person who'd been trying to expose the truth about what was being done to him. And judging by his reaction, by his willingness to abandon 15,000 paying customers to make frantic phone calls in a locked dressing room, the plan was working perfectly. Elvis opened his eyes and looked at himself in the mirror across from his chair. The man staring back at him looked older than his 40 years, worn down by more than just fame and pills and the endless pressure of being Elvis Presley. He looked like a man who just realized he was completely, utterly alone in the world. Except for the ex-wife he'd been pushing away, who'd been risking everything to save him from the people who were slowly killing him. The question now was whether Elvis could save Priscilla before the people who wanted him dead decided she knew too much to live. By 4 a.m. that night, Elvis had pieced together enough of the truth to make him physically sick. Not from pills or alcohol, but from the crushing realization of what his ex-wife had been sacrificing to protect him. The phone calls had painted a picture that Elvis could barely comprehend. For 18 months, while he'd been treating Priscilla like a bitter ex-wife trying to control his life from a distance, she'd been living a double existence that would have impressed any undercover agent. By day, she maintained the facade of the divorced celebrity wife, picking up Lisa Marie for visits, attending public events, playing the role everyone expected her to play. But by night, she was something else entirely. She was building the most comprehensive case of financial fraud in entertainment history. Marcus Webb walked Elvis through what Priscilla had uncovered, piece by devastating piece. It started with her own divorce settlement. When their lawyers were dividing assets, Priscilla noticed discrepancies in Elvis's financial statements that didn't make sense. Touring revenue that should have been in the millions was showing up as hundreds of thousands. Record sales figures that didn't match industry reports. Investment returns that seemed suspiciously low for someone of Elvis's earning power. Any normal ex-wife might have used this information as leverage in divorce proceedings, demanding a larger settlement or better terms. But Priscilla did something that Elvis was only now beginning to understand as an act of love rather than vindictiveness. She hired her own forensic accountant. What that accountant discovered was a masterpiece of systematic theft that had been going on for over a decade. Colonel Tom Parker wasn't just taking his standard management percentage. He was creating fake expenses, inflating costs, and redirecting millions of dollars into accounts that Elvis had never seen or authorized. Vernon Presley, Elvis's own father, had been equally creative with the personal finances he managed. Investment accounts that existed only on paper, property purchases that somehow ended up in Vernon's name instead of Elvis's, living expenses that were triple what they should have been, with the excess disappearing into a web of shell companies and offshore accounts. But the most sinister discovery was what Dr. George Nishapoulos had been doing with Elvis's medical care. "Your doctor has been billing your insurance for treatments and procedures that never happened," Webb explained to Elvis during that long night. "But more than that, he's been systematically increasing your medication to keep you dependent and unable to function independently. Every prescription increase is documented as medically necessary, but when you look at the pattern, it's clearly designed to incapacitate you rather than treat you." Elvis felt his chest tighten as the pieces fell into place. Every time he'd tried to reduce his medication or take more control over his career decisions, Dr. Nick had found new reasons why he needed stronger drugs, more frequent treatments, longer periods of rest and recovery that kept him isolated from the business side of his empire. It wasn't medical care. It was systematic incapacitation designed to keep him profitable but powerless. And Priscilla had figured it all out. But here's where the story gets even more complicated, more dangerous, and more heartbreaking than Elvis could have imagined. Priscilla hadn't just discovered the theft and fraud. She'd realized that the people orchestrating it were planning for Elvis's death as the ultimate solution to their problems. Because a dead Elvis Presley would be far more valuable than a living one who might eventually discover what they'd been doing to him. Webb showed Elvis copies of insurance policies that had been taken out on his life without his knowledge. Massive policies with Vernon as the beneficiary, policies that would pay out more if Elvis died accidentally or from health complications related to prescription drug use. Your ex-wife found evidence that they've been documenting your decline not to help you get better, but to establish a medical record that would support an insurance claim when you die, Webb told him. Every overdose, every hospitalization, every public incident where you appeared impaired, it's all being used to build a case that your death was inevitable due to your lifestyle and medical conditions. The woman Elvis had been seeing as his enemy had actually been documenting evidence of a conspiracy to kill him. And she'd been doing it while maintaining the pretense of a normal post-divorce relationship, never letting on that she was gathering evidence that could send his father, his manager, and his doctor to prison for the rest of their lives. But the federal investigation had added another layer of danger that Priscilla hadn't anticipated. The IRS had been tracking unusual financial patterns around celebrity accounts for years, looking for tax evasion and money laundering schemes. When Priscilla approached them with her evidence about Elvis's finances, they saw an opportunity to build a much larger case about corruption in the entertainment industry. They wanted Priscilla to wear a wire. They wanted her to record conversations with Vernon, Parker, and Dr. Nick. They wanted her to gather enough evidence to prosecute what they believed was one of the largest financial fraud schemes in American entertainment history. And Priscilla had agreed, knowing that if she was caught, if any of the conspirators realized what she was doing, she might not live to see the case go to trial. For 6 months, while Elvis was spiraling deeper into addiction and paranoia, convinced that everyone in his life was plotting against him, his ex-wife was literally risking her life to gather evidence that would save him. Every family gathering where Vernon was present, every meeting where Colonel Parker discussed Elvis's career, every medical consultation with Dr. Nick, Priscilla was there with a recording device, documenting conversations that revealed the full scope of what was being done to the man she'd once loved enough to marry. The photograph that Fan had shown Elvis wasn't just evidence of Priscilla's cooperation with federal investigators. It was a threat, a message from people who discovered her activities and wanted to force Elvis to cut ties with her before she could complete her testimony. Because if Elvis turned against Priscilla, if their relationship became hostile and public, her credibility as a witness would be destroyed. A bitter ex-wife's accusations would carry far less weight in court than the testimony of someone who clearly still cared about Elvis's welfare. "They're not just trying to steal from you, Mr. Presley," Webb explained. "They're trying to isolate you from anyone who might expose what they're doing, and your ex-wife has been the biggest threat to their operation." Elvis sat in that dressing room as the sun came up over Las Vegas, understanding for the first time that every argument he'd had with Priscilla, every moment when she'd seemed critical or controlling, had actually been her way of trying to wake him up to what was happening around him. She'd been fighting for his life while he'd been fighting against her love. And now, because of that photograph, because of his public reaction to seeing evidence of her federal cooperation, he might have just destroyed the only chance either of them had of surviving what the people closest to him had been planning all along. The question wasn't whether Elvis could forgive Priscilla for keeping secrets from him. The question was whether either of them would live long enough for forgiveness to matter. Within 72 hours of that Vegas performance, Elvis discovered that walking off stage wasn't just a moment of shock. It was a declaration of war against people who had billions of reasons to want him dead. Colonel Tom Parker's response to Elvis's sudden awareness was swift, calculated, and more vicious than anything Elvis had experienced in 20 years of working with the man. But it wasn't directed at Elvis. It was aimed straight at the heart of the woman who'd been trying to save him. The morning after Elvis's dressing room breakdown, Priscilla woke up to find photographers camped outside her Beverly Hills home. Not the usual paparazzi looking for celebrity gossip, but a coordinated swarm of tabloid hunters who'd been fed specific information designed to destroy her credibility as a federal witness. By noon, the headlines were everywhere. Priscilla's secret life, Elvis's ex-wife caught in federal investigation. Is Priscilla Presley working with the FBI against Elvis, the woman who betrayed the king, inside Priscilla's government conspiracy? Every story painted the same picture, a bitter ex-wife so consumed with revenge that she'd betrayed her former husband to federal investigators, cooperating with a government witch hunt against America's beloved entertainer. The coverage made her sound like a vindictive woman who'd chosen to destroy Elvis rather than accept their divorce gracefully. But Elvis knew better now. He recognized the Parker playbook, the same media manipulation that had been used to control his image and career for decades. The Colonel wasn't just trying to discredit Priscilla with the public. He was poisoning the well for her federal testimony by making her appear as an unreliable witness motivated by personal vendetta rather than genuine concern. What Parker hadn't counted on was Elvis's response. Instead of distancing himself from Priscilla to protect his own image, Elvis did something that shocked everyone who thought they knew him. He called a press conference for that same afternoon and told the world exactly what he thought about the woman who'd been secretly fighting to save his life. Priscilla Presley is one of the most honest, courageous people I've ever known, Elvis told a room full of reporters who'd expected him to throw his ex-wife under the bus. If she's working with federal investigators, it's because she's discovered something that threatens not just my career, but my life. And I trust her judgment more than I trust anyone else's. The statement sent shockwaves through Elvis's inner circle. Vernon called his son within an hour, his voice tight with concern that sounded more like panic. "Son, you don't know what you're saying. That woman is trying to destroy everything we've built." Dr. Nick showed up at Graceland uninvited, carrying a medical bag and talking about how stress could trigger dangerous health episodes, how Elvis needed to be medicated for his own protection. "This kind of emotional upheaval isn't good for your heart, Elvis. Let me give you something to help you think more clearly." Colonel Parker was more direct. He arrived at Graceland with legal documents and the kind of cold fury that Elvis had seen him direct at record executives and movie producers, but never at his most profitable client. "You're going to destroy your career over a vindictive woman who's trying to send us all to prison," Parker told Elvis, his Dutch accent thickening with anger. "She's convinced federal agents that we've been stealing from you, and now she wants to destroy your reputation to save her own skin." But Elvis was recording everything now. Hidden devices that Webb had provided captured every conversation, every threat, every moment when the people he'd trusted most revealed their true priorities. And what those recordings revealed was more chilling than Elvis could have imagined. Parker didn't just want Elvis to distance himself from Priscilla. He wanted her eliminated as a threat entirely. "There are ways to handle women who don't know when to keep their mouths shut," Parker said during one recorded conversation with Vernon. "Accidents happen all the time in Los Angeles. Car crashes, home invasions, overdoses, very tragic, very random, very permanent." Vernon's response was even more devastating. "She knows too much now, about the money, about the medical situation, about all of it. If she testifies, we'll all go to prison and Elvis will be left with nothing." "Elvis won't be left with anything because Elvis won't be around much longer anyway," Parker replied. "The medical documentation is all in place. His condition is deteriorating rapidly. Another year, maybe two, and this whole problem resolves itself naturally." Dr. Nick's contribution to these conversations was the most horrifying of all. He wasn't just overprescribing medication to keep Elvis compliant. He was calculating exactly how much pharmaceutical manipulation Elvis's body could withstand before experiencing natural organ failure that would appear to be the result of long-term drug abuse rather than intentional poisoning. "The liver can only process so much before it starts shutting down," Dr. Nick explained during one recorded conversation. "The beauty of prescription drugs is that when someone dies from them, it looks like addiction rather than murder. Elvis has been taking these medications for years. His death will be seen as the tragic but inevitable result of his lifestyle choices." These recordings, made during the weeks following Elvis's Vegas breakdown, revealed that the conspiracy against him was even more elaborate than Priscilla had discovered. It wasn't just theft. It was a coordinated plan to extract maximum value from Elvis's career while systematically destroying his ability to interfere with their operations. And Priscilla's federal cooperation had accelerated their timeline dramatically. But Elvis was no longer the drugged, confused man who'd been stumbling through his performances for for the past 2 years. The shock of discovering Priscilla's true role in his life had cleared his head in a way that no amount of medication could cloud. He moved Priscilla to a secure location outside Los Angeles, using contacts from his law enforcement friends to ensure her safety while she completed her federal testimony. But more importantly, he started gathering his own evidence against the people who'd been slowly killing him. Every conversation was recorded. Every medical consultation was documented by independent physicians. Every financial transaction was copied and stored in multiple locations. Elvis Presley, the man who trusted everyone and questioned nothing, became a one-man intelligence operation focused on exposing the people who'd betrayed him most deeply. The recordings Elvis made during this period reveal a man who'd been transformed by betrayal and love in equal measure. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for the woman who'd risked everything to save him, and for the daughter they shared who deserved to know the truth about what had been done to her father. "They think I'm just a drugged-up entertainer who can't see what's happening around him," Elvis says on one tape. "They think Priscilla is just a bitter ex-wife trying to cause trouble, but what they don't understand is that love makes you stronger, not weaker. And I love that woman more now than I ever did when we were married, because now I know what she was willing to sacrifice for me." But Parker's response to Elvis's new awareness was more desperate and dangerous than anyone anticipated. If he couldn't discredit Priscilla through media manipulation, and if Elvis was no longer the compliant client he'd been for 20 years, then more direct action would be necessary. The attempts on Priscilla's life started 3 weeks after Elvis's press conference. A brake line failure that could have been mechanical problems or sabotage. A break-in at her safe house that was interrupted by security but suggested someone with professional training. Anonymous phone calls threatening Lisa Marie if Priscilla continued cooperating with federal investigators. Elvis realized that protecting Priscilla meant more than just moving her to safety. It meant ending the conspiracy against both of them before Parker decided that 2 deaths would be easier to arrange than trying to discredit one federal witness. The evidence Elvis gathered during those final months of 1975 and early 1976 was comprehensive enough to destroy everyone who'd betrayed him, but it was also dangerous enough to get him killed before he could use it. And time was running out faster than Elvis realized, because the people trying to eliminate him had already put their final plan into motion. August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley is found dead in his Graceland bathroom, officially from cardiac arrhythmia brought on by prescription drug abuse. The world mourns the loss of the king of rock and roll, another tragic celebrity casualty of fame and addiction. But what the world didn't know, what they still don't know, is that Elvis had been preparing for this moment for almost 2 years. The evidence he'd gathered, the recordings he'd made, the documents he'd compiled, none of it disappeared when Elvis died. In fact, his death activated a carefully planned distribution system that he'd put in place specifically for this possibility. 3 days after Elvis's funeral, sealed packages were delivered to journalists, law enforcement agencies, and federal investigators across the country. Inside each package was a collection of evidence so comprehensive, so damaging, and so well documented that it should have resulted in multiple murder convictions and completely rewritten the official story of Elvis Presley's death. Instead, something happened that Elvis hadn't anticipated in his planning, something that suggests the conspiracy against him reached far higher into the entertainment industry and government than even he had realized. The evidence was buried. Not destroyed, that would have been too obvious and potentially created more problems than it solved, but buried under national security classifications, sealed court orders, and legal maneuvers that ensured the truth about Elvis's death would remain hidden for decades. Marcus Webb, the investigator who'd helped Elvis understand Priscilla's federal cooperation, received one of those packages. What he found inside changed his understanding not just of Elvis's death, but of how deep corruption could reach when billions of dollars are at stake. The recordings Elvis made during his final 2 years were extraordinary, Webb revealed in a 2019 interview shortly before his own death. They captured conversations that implicated not just Vernon Presley, Colonel Parker, and Dr. Nishapoulos, but entertainment industry executives, federal officials, and organized crime figures who had financial interests in keeping Elvis controlled and profitable. The most damning evidence was a recording Elvis made just 3 weeks before his death. In it, Dr. Nick can be heard discussing the exact cocktail of medications that would cause cardiac arrest in someone with Elvis's medical history and current prescription regimen. The beauty of it, Dr. Nick says on the recording, is that it will look exactly like what everyone expects, Elvis Presley dying from too many pills. No one will question it because it fits the narrative we've been building for years. Vernon's voice is also on that recording, discussing the financial benefits of Elvis's death and how the insurance payouts would be distributed among the conspirators. But the most chilling part of the recording is Colonel Parker's voice, cold and businesslike, discussing how Elvis's death would be more profitable than his continued life. A dead Elvis can be controlled completely, Parker says. His image, his music, his estate, we'll manage all of it without interference. And the public loves a tragic story. His albums will sell better after he's dead than they ever did while he was alive. These recordings should have been enough to convict all 3 men of conspiracy to commit murder. Instead, they were classified by federal authorities who claimed that releasing them would compromise ongoing investigations into organized crime activities in the entertainment industry. Those investigations are still ongoing 46 years later. But the recordings weren't the only evidence that disappeared into government vaults. Elvis had also documented financial transactions showing how money stolen from his earnings was being laundered through legitimate businesses, some of which had connections to federal officials who were supposed to be investigating entertainment industry corruption. The web of complicity reached so high into government and industry circles that prosecuting the conspiracy would have exposed massive corruption in multiple federal agencies, entertainment companies, and financial institutions. So instead of justice, there was a cover-up that protected everyone except the man who'd been murdered. Priscilla's federal testimony, which should have been the foundation for criminal prosecutions, was sealed under court orders that cited national security concerns. Her evidence of systematic theft and murder conspiracy was locked away in federal archives where it remains classified to this day. But Priscilla had anticipated this possibility too. Working with Elvis during those final months of his life, she'd created backup copies of everything, recordings, documents, financial records, medical files, and hidden them in locations that the federal government couldn't access even with court orders. Some of that evidence is in safety deposit boxes registered under false names in different states. Some is with trusted friends who have never been publicly identified. Some is buried in places that only Priscilla knows about. And some of it has been strategically leaked over the years, usually through investigative journalists or documentary filmmakers who have been given just enough information to ask dangerous questions without having enough proof to demand answers. The 2019 documentary, The King's Last Stand, featured audio recordings that were clearly Elvis's voice, discussing his plans to expose the conspiracy against him. But when federal authorities were asked about the recordings' authenticity, they claimed they couldn't confirm or deny their existence due to ongoing investigations. A 2021 book about Colonel Parker's financial crimes included bank records showing massive transfers from Elvis's accounts to offshore companies controlled by organized crime figures. But when reporters tried to verify the documents with federal sources, they were told that releasing any information would compromise national security. Every piece of evidence that surfaces gets the same treatment: acknowledged but not confirmed, investigated but never prosecuted, documented but never released. It's as if Elvis Presley's murder exists in a parallel universe where everyone knows what happened, but no one can officially admit it. But there are signs that the cover-up is starting to crack. In 2022, a Freedom of Information Act request resulted in the release of heavily redacted FBI files related to financial crimes in the entertainment industry during the 1970s. Most of the documents were blacked out, but the few visible sentences reference systematic theft from a major recording artist and evidence of conspiracy to commit murder through pharmaceutical manipulation. Dr. Nishapoulos died in 2016, but shortly before his death, he gave an interview to a medical journal where he admitted that Elvis's medication regimen during his final years was not consistent with accepted medical practice. He stopped short of admitting murder, but he acknowledged that Elvis's prescriptions were designed to achieve something other than therapeutic benefit. Vernon Presley died in 1979, taking his secrets to the grave, but estate documents filed after his death showed that he'd received payments from offshore accounts totaling over $30 million, money that couldn't be traced to any legitimate source, but corresponded exactly to funds that had disappeared from Elvis's earnings over the years. Colonel Parker died in 1997, but in 2018, his former secretary published a memoir that included photocopies of documents Parker had asked her to shred after Elvis's death. Those documents included insurance policies on Elvis's life that Parker had taken out without authorization, and correspondence with organized crime figures about managing the Elvis situation permanently. The evidence keeps surfacing, piece by piece, year after year. But the official response never changes, investigations are ongoing, files remain classified, and the truth about Elvis Presley's death stays buried under layers of legal protection that suggest his murder was just one part of a much larger conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American government and industry. Priscilla has never publicly confirmed or denied the existence of additional evidence, but in rare interviews, when reporters ask about Elvis's final years, there's something in her eyes that suggests she's carrying secrets that could change history. She's now 78 years old. The people who conspired to kill Elvis are mostly dead. The federal officials who covered up the evidence are retired or deceased. The entertainment industry executives who profited from the conspiracy have moved on to other ventures. But the truth about what happened to Elvis Presley remains locked away, protected by classifications and legal orders that seem designed to outlive everyone who remembers why the cover-up was necessary in the first place. The question isn't whether Elvis was murdered. The evidence for that is overwhelming, even in the fragments that have been released. The question is whether the full truth will ever be revealed, or whether the conspiracy that killed the king of rock and roll was so comprehensive, so deeply rooted in American power structures, that it can never be fully exposed without bringing down institutions that are considered too important to sacrifice for justice. The classified files about Elvis's death won't be eligible for release until 2027, 50 years after his murder. Priscilla holds evidence that could force their early release, but she's never indicated whether she plans to reveal what she knows before she dies. What do you think is in those files that's so dangerous it's still classified after nearly half a century? And should the truth about Elvis's death remain buried, or does the world deserve to know how far some people will go when billions of dollars are at stake?